I think that maybe speaks to her power just as much as what she did in her life, is that this fascination is still there.
We're talking today on The Place for History about Josephine Baker. And I'll ask you about the big donation the museum received recently here. But before we talk about the donation, I thought we'd go through a little bit of the life and times of Baker because she's a fascinating character.
Yeah.
She grew up in St. Louis. Tell me about her early life.
Yeah, so she was born in St. Louis. She was born at the female hospital, which used to be called the Social Evils Hospital when prostitution was legal in St. Louis for a brief time. We don't know a lot about her birth, and in fact, the who was her father was a mystery that existed throughout her life. She was never able to find out who her father was. Her adopted son tried to find that out in subsequent years and just could not find that out. Lots of people, Josephine included, believed that it was probably a white man, but did not know for sure. So her mother also did not know, by the way, much about her own family tree because she was adopted and lived in Little Rock, I believe, and so didn't have a whole lot of history. So she, almost immediately are these mysteries that surround her and her heritage. They live in what was known as the Chestnut Valley area of St. Louis in the Mill Creek neighborhood. This was an area that had become sort of a Black enclave. It was also the place where ragtime was, in the streets and just performances. And so she is sort of steeped in a space that is filled with entertainment. And she, at a very young age, joins in and starts performing and starts singing and dancing really on the streets, kind of with hat in hand, until a theater owner in St. Louis sees her and says, "You're the best thing I've ever seen. You've got to start performing for my theater."
So how does she get that break? How does she make this acquaintance with this owner?
Yeah, so he pretty much found her on the streets and sort of brought her in. But then she joins a couple of troops, some that then start to travel. And then when she gets to New York, I believe at the age of only 15 at this point, she ends up staying in New York and performing in clubs and troops there.
So the early life is difficult, but she has a talent that shines through. Is that what I'm hearing?
It definitely shines through. In fact, sometimes it got her in trouble because she would be on these troops where she was supposed to be on a line of dancers. And, the manager said, "This is what you're supposed to do." But Josephine knew how to work a crowd. And so she would oftentimes freelance and just do whatever she wanted to do. And the audience would immediately react to her. Well, that sometimes made fellow dancers upset. It sometimes made managers upset. But it was clear from the very beginning that she just had something that others didn't have, a once in a generation talent, and really just almost just aura. I mean, there was just something about her that people gravitated toward and wanted to see more of, and that oftentimes made them laugh. I mean, she was oftentimes joking and doing these exaggerated movements. And so it was just, she just brought a joy to people that was unrivaled.
So Jody, she doesn't stay in St. Louis, doesn't stay in New York. Where does she wind up?
Yeah, so she ends up going to Paris. She definitely says it's because of discrimination in the United States, and she's treated so much better in Paris, which is true. I think her son has since said, well, that was kind of a story created later, that she really was moving because there were opportunities to dance, and this was a professional move. I think it's a little bit of both. She, of course, talked eloquently throughout her career about the scourge of discrimination in the United States. So it was definitely something that she talked about. I think another fascinating part of her career, right? We talk about her stage performance or the fact that she was the first Black woman in a major motion picture. So there's that chapter. There's also, of course, the French Resistance chapter when she is working as a spy. And then there's this civil rights activism chapter. She is at the March on Washington. She is speaking out. I always say that the important St. Louis connections is she was born in St. Louis. She got her start in St. Louis, and she gave one of her most important civil rights speeches in St. Louis. And that was in 1952 at the Kiel Auditorium. She comes back for this reunion, homecoming of sorts, but she had said that she would not perform in any segregated theaters. And so she comes to the Kiel. She's obviously happy to be back in St. Louis, but she does talk about in powerful ways about all of the racism that she witnessed and that was aimed at her. She talks about being a kid and seeing the East St. Louis race riots in 1917. She remembers going to the banks of the Mississippi River and just seeing the city aflame and all of these Black East St. Louisans escaping over the bridges to St. Louis, and how that just left a mark on her, something that she could never forget. So her civil rights activism and story and the way that she was able to deliver that message, not through dance, but through the power of her words, was equally important.
So I'm going to jump back in time just a little bit and then work our way up to returning to St. Louis. Her efforts during the war, World War II, I should say, she, as you mentioned, is much more than an entertainer. What shape does that take where she earns the admiration of the French when they learn what she did?
Yeah, the highest French medal was given to her. Some things I don't know truly that we know everything that she did. In fact, I think in just the last few years, some things have been declassified that showed that she was helping American and British forces as well, more than we knew. Sometimes she was passing notes. Oftentimes, this is what she was doing. So sometimes written in invisible ink. So all that stuff we see on the movies was really happening, and she was part of it. And so sometimes she was doing that work, at the clubs, and people getting messages that could be delivered to others. So yeah, it's a fascinating chapter as well, and certainly something that that the French considered to be of utmost importance and a huge help.
Essentially, she becomes a spy. She spies on the Nazis for the French, the Americans, and the British.
Yeah, so she would also, see things that she would see in clubs and performing for people, but oftentimes passing along those messages. So,
and as you mentioned just a moment ago, after the war ends, she does this heroic work during the war. If she had been caught, the Nazis would have killed her. She's not done, though, being a great humanitarian. She takes on, as you mentioned, the issue of greatest importance in America and that time frame, which was the treatment of Black people in the United States.
Yeah, she called. I just want to make sure I got it right. She talked about the terror of discrimination. She called it that horrible beast which paralyzes one's very soul and body. That was from her 1952 Kiel Auditorium speech here in St. Louis, but she was basically on a tour in the United States, speaking about these issues in cities across the country. I think this is one of those cases where, Sometimes it's just the right person with the right message. And she was such a powerful messenger. One, because she could talk about how this affected her personally. That scene of her being on the banks of the Mississippi and seeing people fleeing for their lives because they were being attacked by a white mob, uh, just is incredibly powerful. But also, she has this stature as this worldwide known entertainer. She was the icon of the jazz era. And so she had a platform, she had a bully pulpit, and she was going to use that.
And she did, in fact. I understand at one point she was invited to perform in St. Louis and she declined
Yep.
that invitation. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And this would happen in various places. I mean, she just made it clear she was not going to play in any places that did not allow Black audiences to come in. And when she does speak at the Keel, she specifically talks about that and then talks about on this day being able to look out and see the salt and the pepper and see all the people of different races sharing the audience and how much that meant to her.
So she's an entertainer, a movie star, a spy, and a civil rights leader. What a life.
And in addition, she adopts 12 children. And she had a pet cheetah. I mean, there are these things that just keep, you just can't imagine that one person could embody all of these different aspects and be so fascinating. It's one reason. So she dies in 1975. I think one of the aspects that I'm most fascinated by is just how much interest remains in Josephine Baker. The number of books that have come out in just the last few years. In fact, this year was the first time that her memoir was published in English and has gotten on many best of year lists. I think it was in 1978 when Felicia Rashad, the wife on the Cosby Show, releases a disco album all about Josephine Baker. There have been plays just this year in St. Louis. There was opera about Josephine Baker, and at the end of the year, Dance Theater St. Louis is going to do a dance performance about Josephine Baker. So I think that maybe speaks to her power just as much as what she did in her life, is that this fascination is still there. I mean, it was just a few years ago that she got inducted into the Pantheon, the first Black woman to ever be given that honor in Paris. These are things that happened well after her death, books, performances, honors that are still being given to her.
And you have the honor at the museum of receiving more than 400 items from a donor related to Baker. What can you tell me about those?
Yeah, so Mary Strauss is one of St. Louis's great philanthropists, is known, probably most well known for revitalizing the Fox Theater in St. Louis. So anyone who goes to the Fox has Mary Strauss to thank. But she has also always been fascinated by Josephine Baker. And starting in the 1980s, she starts to build a collection of posters and programs and things celebrating Josephine Baker, cookie jars and orchid vases and anything she can get her hands on that's related to Josephine Baker, she wants to collect. And she creates exhibits that were at the National Portrait Gallery, exhibits that were here in St. Louis, all about Josephine Baker. But in the last few years, she's been thinking about what she should do with this collection. It's close to 500 items, and she's still been collecting in the last few weeks, even as she was about to give this donation to the Missouri Historical Society. And she could have done anything. She could have sold that in pieces. She could have given it to a national museum. The Smithsonian definitely would have been interested. But I think she realized how important it was to to recognize that Josephine Baker was born in St. Louis and got her start here and gave one of her most important civil rights speeches here, and that this collection was built here in St. Louis. So ultimately, she decided that she wanted to keep it in St. Louis. And we were very honored that she would do so and that it could stay here at the Missouri Historical Society, where it will be preserved for generations to come. And, as future generations become fascinated by Josephine Baker, this will help them tell that story.
Now, was the famous banana outfit, was that part of this collection?
No, unfortunately, no.
Okay.
She only has one dress that we know was worn by Josephine Baker, and this was in her later life. So we do have that. We have a dress and boots, and we have shown that on display. Mary has loaned that for us in the past. But no, not the banana skirt.
Baker also did what a lot of celebrities do, endorse products, and part of that was related to her hair, Baker Fix. Do you have examples of that?
Yes. So Mary had a few Baker Fix items in her collection, including a jar that still has some Baker Fix in it. So we won't be allowing visitors to use it in their own hair. But
Okay.
but yeah, she is a businesswoman as well. Baker is, and you see that with Baker Fix. And then I do love, in the collection, I absolutely love the posters and the sheet music and the things that came from actual performances. But I just as much like things like Baker Fix, or like that cookie jar, or like that vase that just shows how intrigued audiences were, how she becomes this global celebrity. And I think it's hard, especially for young people, to understand. They're bombarded with celebrities now, right?
Yeah.
But this is before the internet can make anyone famous, or YouTube can make anyone famous. And yet she was known around the world. And I think Baker Fix is one of those things, like, people wanted stuff associated with Josephine Baker.
So if I wanted to come, or somebody from the Ozarks wanted to come to St. Louis and view this collection and learn more about her, when will it be on display, and where?
Yeah, so the collection will come to us over time. So it's not all going to come to us at once. We will show parts of it in a wide variety of exhibits, including in one next year. But in 2028, we have a Josephine Baker show planned. And also in 2028, we're opening up a new decade by decade look at St. Louis history. It's a 12,000 square foot exhibit that looks at every decade in St. Louis history. And of course, that would be incomplete without the Josephine Baker story. So you will see it there. For people who can't travel, we have a new curated collections website that shares bits of our collection. Soon there will be a Josephine Baker feature on that, so you won't have to travel. We always want you to travel and come to the History Museum, but there will be examples of it. And then, of course, one thing that's really important to mention as well is these items won't just be on display in St. Louis. This really is probably the world's largest collection of Josephine Baker items. So museums across the country and around the world will be borrowing items from this collection for their own exhibits. And when they do, it will say that, Josephine Baker was born right here in St. Louis, and these items came from St. Louis.
And for people who aren't familiar with St. Louis, if I remember correctly, the museum is in Forest Park area.
It is. So we are on the north side of Forest Park at Lendell and de Bolivar. And we are always happy to have people out. We have an amazing World's Fair exhibit open right now, and an amazing exhibit that's sort of an artifact showcase about our collection that we've been building since 1866. And soon, coming in November, Josephine Baker related, we will have an exhibit about the Mill Creek Valley neighborhood where she grew up.
Great. And I want to point out, we didn't talk about that. The Mill Creek Valley, my understanding of that is kind of the area near Union Station. And are we talking about the area toward where the highway is now?
Yes, so
that's the area,
kind of Union Station to St. Louis University, or Union Station to Grand. Okay. The highway does run through that. And yes, this was one of the biggest urban renewal. This was long after Josephine Baker left, but one of the biggest urban renewal efforts in the country. 20,000 African Americans displaced because the neighborhood was labeled a slum. And so we just raised it along the way, destroying churches and businesses and homes and a real sense of community.
And put a highway over it.
Yeah, and a lot of empty green space right now, but
yeah, which isn't unique to St. Louis. A lot of that happened across the country.
It's a common story, but this was one of the biggest. So,
okay, Jody Sowell with the Missouri Historical Society. I greatly appreciate your time, and you must just be thrilled to have received this collection.
It's just an amazing honor when you think of all the places it could have gone for it to be able to not just be here at the Missouri Historical Society, but really stay in St. Louis is incredibly meaningful.
All right, Jody, thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.